everybody. It's Tom Woods, episode 2680, and I'm joined once again by Vladimir Brovkin, who is my old Harvard professor. When I say my old Harvard professor, I don't mean you're old. I mean, it's just been a long time since I was there.
That's right.
He was my professor of Russian history. He was so compelling, I think I told this story before, that one day I invited my girlfriend to come with me to one of his classes. I did not do this for any other class, but I just said, you have to come with me. He's the most interesting guy in the world. And then all these years later, our paths have crossed again. His most recent book is From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity, 1913 to 2023. And I thought today, given that at the end of this week, there is a meeting in Alaska between Donald Trump and Putin, that we it might be an opportune moment to assess where things are with Russia and Ukraine. So, Professor Brovkin, welcome back.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm glad to see you.
Now, I mentioned to you in our email correspondence that this episode would be coming out 2 days before that meeting, and I thought, is that meeting going to make our whole discussion moot? And you insisted that it absolutely would not. For a number of reasons. Even if there were some big diplomatic breakthrough, there were still many open questions, but you were suggesting to me that it was unlikely that any definitive resolution would be reached at the Alaska meeting. Why do you think that is?
Well, everything is a process, and this has been a very long story, so I doubt that it's possible to resolve all the outstanding issues. It's just all a matter of how you define the issues, and the Western media defines the issues as the territorial question, which is only one and not even the most important one. And moreover, I think that Putin convinced Trump to have a meeting by saying exactly that the territorial issue, the war in Ukraine issue, is only one side of the relationship. And these are two superpowers, at least in military terms. And the fate of the earth in some ways depends on whether the United States and Russia would go to war against each other. And therefore, the relationship and the meeting probably would put some time devoted to Ukraine, but other times would talk about possible areas of cooperation, such as in a missile defense treaty, space weapons treaty, or some kind of revival of the START treaty. And then, of course, drill, baby, drill, which means that there could be joint development of Alaska and Siberia and the Arctic Ocean and all kinds of other joint projects. As I mentioned in my previous video, it seems to me that Putin offered Trump something that Trump likes, which is making money together and some kind of rare earth or oil or gas or whatever. And that seems to me, logical that let's resolve the issue of Ukraine and then move on to making money and making peace. That seems to be, the subtext of it.
I heard that John Bolton, who is known for being hawkish in basically all circumstances, I've never seen him not hawkish, is complaining that this very meeting is a concession to Putin and elevates him unjustifiably. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, all my comments in my video channel, on my YouTube channel, they all say exactly the opposite. Because I kind of said that Putin, initiated this, and they said no. It is Trump who needs Putin. It is Trump who wants to get out of these scandals and all kinds of economic problems. And he wants to be on the center stage. And in my last video, what I suggested is that Putin wants to play along. He wants to actually do a favor to Trump. And, everybody's asking, why is it that Putin is so eager to establish a relationship? And my interpretation is that Putin is like that. And if we look at Putin in a longer historical perspective, people forget very quickly, but let's just roll back to the year 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5. In those years, Putin was a personal friend with just about every leader of the Western world. He spoke with Schröder, Chancellor Schröder. He spoke in front of the Bundestag and talked about German-Russian relationship and responsibility for peace, and all kinds of projects were launched, such as Nord Stream 1 and then Nord Stream 2. He was a personal friend with Prime Minister Berlusconi. And I have pictures where you could see Berlusconi is just holding him by the neck, and there's such a joy, like the closest buddy. And he invited him to his personal home in Sardinia. They were really good pals. And then President Bush called him a friend. I looked him in the eye and I saw this, he was a good guy. And you could go on. And then and Merkel and Chancellor Merkel and Hollande president and Chirac. I mean, they were all friends with Putin. In other words, Putin has this charm about him, and he likes to make, personal relationship, and he succeeded in it until quite recently. He tried it, as a matter of fact, with Biden. I remember the very first conversation they had. Putin was very, very favorably disposed, and then just Biden was like a stone wall. He wouldn't let anything happen, and it was the first and the last, if I recall. So Putin, is very different from, other Russian leaders who are much, much more negative about the West. The West is strange because they don't understand that the guy who really wants to have good relations with the West is Putin, and yet they demonize him as if he's, devil incarnate. They call him all kinds of names, killer, Hitler, blah, blah, blah. And that's strange because in the political spectrum of Russian leaders, he is truly the one who tried over and over and over again to establish good relations with the West.
I might add, by the way, that the American establishment that characterizes him this way is itself responsible for its share of deaths. But for some reason, they never think about it that way, because everything they do is righteous and in the name of democracy and whatever. So they view themselves that they have halos over their heads, but they really don't. Now, in terms of Trump and his policy, he seems to have been rather erratic in his policy on Russia, as he is on a number of things. And he seemed at one point to be inclined to turn off the aid spigot to Ukraine. And then all of a sudden he's saying things like, we would be prepared to win a nuclear war with Russia. See, I don't know that there is a strain of thought here that we can make sense of. I think rather we have an erratic personality on our hands. Can you make sense of it?
I can make sense of it, and I disagree with people who, you see.
Oh, let's hear. I would love to hear this.
Yeah, I have a theory of that. You see, we should not take at face value what people are saying today, and then tomorrow he says a different thing, and then it would come inconsistent. The consistency is in inconsistency. And the reason there's inconsistency is very simple to explain. That Trump hates when people label him Putin's stooge, Putin's puppet, Putin's this, Putin's that. He really hates it. This is why before he started this recent rapprochement with Putin, he started a kind of a case against Obama and Clinton for inventing this story that Russia interfered in the elections and that Trump was on the pay of the Kremlin and all this nonsense. That was the so-called Russiagate. So if we look at this irrationality of Trump from this perspective, it becomes perfectly clear. In fact, Trump actually grew in my eyes by showing that he's a very, very clever politician. What he did, essentially, he started out his term as office with very positive, beginning with no NATO, multipolar world, Russia's security needs to be recognized, very positive. Then Zelensky was super rude to him in the Oval Office. And then it appeared, and the key word is appeared. It appeared like he went to the conservatives and to Lindsey Graham and started threatening and with submarines and sanctions. Why did he do that? Because he knew very well that Putin doesn't pay attention to these insults and these things. Putin is always above these local kind of temporary insults and threats. And Trump knew that. So he had to do it in order to appease his Republican Party conservatives like Lindsey Graham, who hates Russia, who is on record of saying that the best thing Ukrainians do is kill a lot of Russians, and we Americans don't have to spend our own lives on this. So he had to do it. He also had to figure out what the Europeans are up to. So he went to Europe. He talked to all these people who hate Russia, who want to, escalate. And he basically turned it around, the tables on them, said, but you guys better pay 5% or else. That means, and I agree with Dr. Doctorow, who said this is a way for Trump to get out of NATO, which he sees as a burden for the United States, that the assets of controlling the empire are not good enough, that America has more important things to do in economy and in competition with China. So therefore, my view of this is that he doesn't care about paying for the war, which the Europeans, as Vance said, let them pay for it. My point is that Trump and Putin were together all along from January onwards. And this meeting was prepared months in advance. When people have a short meeting, like the Russians and Ukrainians in Istanbul, that means there's nothing to talk about. They talk for 40 minutes, they go away. When I hear on the news that Witkoff talked for 3 hours, and then there's a second or third time, and another 4 hours, and another 4 hours, what are they talking about? They are talking about the relationship between the United States and Russia, how to finish the war, and the details. What are you going to get? What are you going to get? What are you going to do if this happens, if that happens? So my feeling is that Trump outplayed everybody who think that he's erratic, that he changes his mind, blah, blah, blah. In fact, he's just made a deal with Putin. We'll see the contours of this deal. I don't think it's finished. It's a work in progress. But the general thrust of Trump and Putin was towards each other from January or maybe even earlier.
I don't rule out that possibility, by the way, because I know that Richard Nixon used to have the opinion that it helped him in negotiations if he could be made to appear like a crazy person and to the public. But then Henry Kissinger would go and speak to people privately and say, and he would even say, now this isn't exactly what Trump is up to, but he would say, I have this crazy person over here that I can't control, and if you don't make some concessions. But the similarity is that what they would say in public was not always what they really meant. Yeah. And that was not always what was really being said behind the scenes. So I absolutely don't rule out what you've said. But can you clarify, is it true that the Russians, as part of a ceasefire deal, might or indeed have insisted on the cessation of martial law in Ukraine and the holding of elections? And if so, I don't know if Ukraine would hold elections under duress like that, but what could that mean?
Yeah, well, this has been discussed a long time. In fact, from the very beginning in Trump-Putin talks about the future of Ukraine, Putin said it a very long time that Zelensky's signature is not worth anything, because his term is expired. And any future president of whatever is left of Ukraine will say, I'm not bound by his signature. So there's got to be a legitimate signature of a legitimately elected president. And therefore, Putin also said on several occasions that he could run in the next elections if he's allowed to by the constitution. That's just fine. But so a part of the plan, everybody's focusing on territories. A part of the plan is that there is a ceasefire, there's exchange of territories, and then there should be elections and all kinds of other provisions, which the Russians definitely put in the agreement, which nobody talks about, which is that demilitarization of Ukraine in exchange for security guarantees. In other words, if the Russians said, let them demilitarize and then we can walk in. No, I'm sure that Lindsey Graham, when he today spoke to Fox News, said security guarantees that Russia knows that they will never blah, blah, blah. That's for serious. So there will be security guarantees, but not only to Ukraine, because this is what Zelensky wants, but Putin also wants security guarantees that NATO is not going to attack Russia when they're ready in 27, 28. And that brings us to Putin's dream that he's been having for 20 years, which is a new architecture of European security. He was saying it all along. that NATO should be disbanded, and instead there should be a new treaty of European security that would codify the new borders and the new realities in Europe. And in that case, Russia wouldn't feel threatened by NATO. NATO wouldn't be threatened by Russia. And that would be much, much more important if this were accomplished. This would be much more important than a ceasefire or even a peace between Russia and Ukraine, because that would establish a framework for a new kind of era of peace, like Yalta or like Congress of Vienna in 1815. And I think that's what Putin wants. He's a senior politician. He's got a few years left, then he is going to retire. And I think he wants to be remembered as a person who has established a decent, respectable position of Russia for Russia in the world, not the way it is now, ostracized and blamed for everything, insulted with sanctions and so forth. He wants to end the sanctions, end NATO expansion, and for that he's willing to pay. And the payment could be to deprive Russia of what some people say is inevitably Russian victory. The Russians are moving, and if Zelensky is stupid enough to reject the deal, my prediction is that the war will continue and the Russians would win and the Ukrainian state would collapse. And in that case, Odessa and Kharkov may vote actually to join Russia, because these are Russian cities and they, many there are not really happy to remain in Ukraine. But Putin is ready to sacrifice that for the larger goal of reestablishing normal kind of border-defined relationship with the.
One obstacle that would face is that we have at least some people in the United States who believe that his ultimate goal is to reestablish the Soviet empire. So if you concede anything to him, then you're going to be sorry, because before you know it, it'll be Poland or whatever else. And we even have Nikki Haley having said, well, he admitted it himself that he wants to get control of these various countries. But if you ever ask her, where did he say that? There is no answer. But of course, in the American media, nobody does ask her for that. But how would you respond to that claim?
Yeah, I would respond like this. He genuinely thinks that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a catastrophe. But not because he wants to keep the empire, but because 22 million Russians wound up living in foreign countries, scattered all over. And pretty much everywhere, they are not in good shape. They're discriminated against. In Ukraine, Russian language is banned. The Russian Orthodox Church is attacked. In Kazakhstan, they're also kind of being pushed out. In Latvia, there's a special term which is called not citizen. It's really a shame. It's apartheid regime. They don't have a right to vote. They don't have a right to serve in the state institutions. It's truly a discrimination regime for about a third, if not more, of the population of Latvia. So from that point of view, Putin thinks it is a catastrophe. It is a shame. But what I think he wants is not restore Russian empire, but restore something that the British call Commonwealth. What's a Commonwealth? It's something in common. It's the British traditions and British trade and British this and that and cultural links, and that kind of an informal association that would be profitable and would have a benefit to the countries surrounding Russia, countries that used to be a part of the Soviet Union. And if you look at the map, look, Kazakhstan is a huge border with Russia, and the other country that has a huge border is China. Now, that makes perfect sense that this country has to have normal relations with its neighbors, and not only neighbors, but the most important two biggest countries in the world, economically, politically, militarily. So it makes perfect sense that they should have normal relations, especially since about 40% of the population of Kazakhstan are ethnic Russians. So that's what he wants. He wants to have open borders, economic cooperation, no NATO bases, no CIA bases, no British subversive MI centers as now are in Ukraine. In that sense, he wants to restore the Soviet Union as a kind of a commonwealth of friendly states. There's nothing wrong with that. The United States would want the same thing. The United States wants to have good relations with all Latin American countries and doesn't like when some foreigners, come in there, like in Cuba or Venezuela, and are better friends with others.
We talked about the possibility of Zelensky being up for election, but what about the Ukrainian parliament? Is there any prospect of that? And what would new elections mean? Because I don't know what the state of public opinion in Ukraine is.
I heard the state of the public opinion just about a couple of days ago. 67% of Ukrainians want to stop the war, even if it means territorial concessions to Russia. 68%. 24% want to continue the war until victorious end. This is 24%, mostly in the west of Ukraine. Now, here's my, I wouldn't say prediction. It's hard to predict because every case in history is different. But let me put it like this. The situation in Russia in early 1917, January 1917, was very similar to the situation that Ukraine faces today, which is that there was a conspiracy to remove the Tsar by the general staff of the Russian army, who thought that he is incapable of leading Russia to victory. They wanted to replace it so that they fight the war better. In the end, it was the collapse of the regime as such. And the party that won in the end are those who were ready to sign what was called Pahabny Mir, which is a shameful peace, which means to let Germany take over half of Russia. It was Lenin who was ready to do that. So, which means that if we compare to the situation in Ukraine, the majority of people want peace. The government and the people associated with the ruling circles are the nationalists who want to fight to the end. But they can't. They know they're losing, just like Russia was losing in 1917. And if they're smart, they would reconcile to the loss, turn the page, and start rebuilding Ukraine. But they're not smart. They will not accept loss of territory, even though they know they can't win. They would hope that the miracle would happen, that Putin would die, that somebody will replace Trump, that the Europeans are going to find the money, blah, blah, blah. They will, to the last minute, they would hope that something is going to prevent the inevitable outcome. What is going to happen if they reject the peace? Within a matter of 2 or 3 months, Russia will take over completely Donbass, which is the Donetsk region. And then it would continue to Kherson and Zaporozhye, which is officially Russian territory by the constitution. Now, and I'm sure Putin would offer them peace again. He would say, this is our terms, I stick to them. They will probably again reject it. And then the road will be open to Odessa and Kharkov. Now, when I looked at the political parties in Ukraine, it's like a whole spectrum. There are some that are openly neo-Nazi and who want to fight the Russians till the last breath in their hearts, to fight the Russians, the Ruskies, the Rusnya, as they call it, a very derogatory term. And now says that historical reconciliation is in order and that the only future Ukraine has is together with Russia, preferably as partners and not as a part of Russia. So there's this huge spectrum. Arestovich, who was the aide and advisor to Zelensky in the early years, now is in the United States, and I listen to his podcasts all the time, and he says that he would sign because he believes that the best deal for Ukraine is to cut the losses and move on, and have neutral status and develop as an independent country. In the best case scenario, joining EU. So that's the spectrum. And it seems to be that if the nationalists who hold power continue in their resistance to accepting reality, then they're going to lose more. That's just what I think, yeah.
So supposing, is there a prospect for a genuine power struggle in Ukraine? Zelensky has more or less ruled the way he's wanted to up to now.
Yes, absolutely. Today, there was Times of India showed a piece that there was a nationalist member of the Rada who gave a very strong speech against Zelensky, saying that there would be a power struggle, saying that he would be overthrown. Yes, people are becoming much more outspoken. But it's not only the fight for power among the nationalists. What may happen is that if there is a ceasefire and they lift the martial law, all these people who were silent, who were afraid to be dragged into the police, they will come out into the streets and they would have a right to vote. And if the public opinion poll is correct, that 87% of Ukrainians want peace, then there may be other candidates that who would appear and would compete for elections. The elections is a very difficult case because there are millions of Ukrainians in Europe. There are some in the United States, and there are about 3 or 4 million in Russia with Ukrainian passports who ran away through Belarus or some other means. So how do you verify the documents? How do you get them to vote? This is logistically a very difficult thing to do, but it could be done with UN inspections, with all kinds of neutral, African police or some other neutral countries, Chinese, Indian, whatever, so that there are free and honest elections, and then people would decide what they want and what kind of government. I do not exclude the possibility that the nationalists from the west of Ukraine would simply split and create their own rump state that would want to be in NATO and in EU. And they might say, well, if we couldn't get all of Ukraine, then at least we will get Lvov into NATO and into EU. They might just prefer that than being together with the Ruskies and the people that they hate so much. In other words, there are so many open possibilities that we don't even know which way it's going to go. If people would accept certain provisions, if not, then some other things that worry me so much is that my comments on YouTube, people are saying, a lot of people are writing to me saying it's a setup. They're going to kill Putin. He's going to a wolf's trap. He shouldn't be going there, that the neocons are going to kill him, that his airplane is going to be shot down from the skies, all kinds of things like this. In other words, the negotiations can't be torpedoed by the Ukrainians or by the Europeans or even by some circles in the United States. So it's a very, very difficult process. But I wish Trump and Putin luck. I think it's a real chance of moving on and establishing normal relations between our countries.
You mentioned earlier that one of Trump's motivations at the moment for this immediate event is he's got a lot of things going on that he'd rather not talk about or deal with, and this diverts attention away from those things. But leaving aside this particular thing, he has had some interest in trying to bring a conclusion to this conflict with Russia and Ukraine, even before these issues came up. And so I guess my question is, what do you think Trump's, apart from this distraction thing, what does Trump stand to gain from this, apart from the personal satisfaction of knowing that he carried out a good thing, given that his enemies, even if he's successful, especially if he's successful, will portray what he's done as proof that Trump is under the thumb of the Russians?
Okay.
Well, what's positive that comes out of this for him?
Yeah, okay, I'll tell you. This is all, the answer was given by Vance during the election campaign before elections. And this has to do with what I call Kissinger legacy. Kissinger said, in fact, he said it even when he was alive. He was about 100, and just a few years ago, and he was speaking about these things. He said that the United States should never alienate Russia and China at the same time. This is the stupidest thing that Biden did, which is drive Russia into the hands of China and China into the hands of Russia. It just doesn't make any sense. What does make sense is Nixon legacy. And the Nixon legacy is that you play the game of diplomacy by balancing of power between the great powers. At the beginning of the year, I made a video which is called The Three Kings. And that's basically, the President of the United States, the President of Russia, and the party chair or president in China. They are the three greatest and most important powers in the world today. And the relationship between them should be balanced. Now, Russia and China have a very close cooperation, but it's not a military alliance. The Chinese don't want that. Now, China and the United States have a very important trade relationship, which is 3 times bigger than the relationship with Russia. So they have their own mutual interests that Russia is not a part of. And the Vance idea and those in the Margaret movement who said we should establish good relations with Russia, not because we love Russia, not because Russia is this and that, as a counterweight to China, just as a practical, commonsensical approach that you can actually benefit from this counterbalancing act. It could take all kinds of forms. It could take a forms of economic relationship, of military treaties, balance of power, or missiles, or whatever. But indeed, it is foolish to drive Russia into the hands of China and the same thing. So what Trump is probably trying to do is to move in that direction. For him, China, as we know the way he speaks about it, is a major challenge to the United States, not Russia. Russia is only a challenge if you fight it. But nobody wants to fight Russia because that means it's a nuclear war. It's the end of our civilization. So this should not happen. And every reasonable person understands that. But in terms of competition with China, I and many, many, many others believe that the challenge number one for the United States is economic revival in competition with China. And Trump knows this. Because if you listen to his speeches before elections, he was saying, we're the third world, we're behind this and we're behind that. He wants to reverse it. He sees his name in history as a person who made America great again. And that could only be done by reviving American industry and reviving American productivity in competition with China. That means rapprochement with Russia. That's what he wants to get. And I think that's the reason for his action.
Silly even bringing this up, but the EU is an issue. They're not as much of an issue as they think they are, but at the same time, the EU has played a role in all this, and they've been staunch supporters of Ukraine. I mean, you hear the odd European dissenting voice like Hungary, but by and large, they've been staunch supporters of Ukraine in terms of aid and weapons, sanctions against Russia, and so forth. So if Trump and Putin together manage to put something together, do you think the EU has enough clout to put a monkey wrench into that, or not?
Okay, well, the EU thinks. You see, EU is not EU. There is no such thing as EU. When we look at the coalition of the willing, it has Britain is not a member of the EU. It has France and Germany and Finland and Poland and the Baltic countries. Spain doesn't ever take any initiatives against Russia or in terms of eagerness to help Ukraine. Neither does Italy, nor Greece, nor Ireland. And there are like a couple dozen EU countries that you never hear from. So it's von der Leyen who speaks on behalf of EU. But in fact, it's only a small number of countries that are today's leaders are staunchly for Ukraine and staunchly anti-Russia. But, and this is the key fact, I live in France. Nobody in France wants to fight Russia. Nobody. I don't think you'd find one person who would say, yeah, we should go fight Russia. If they say, yeah, we should help Ukraine defend its sovereignty, this and that, but a conflict with Russia, it just doesn't make any sense. The same thing is in Italy, probably even more so. And Germany is divided, but clearly, the more east you go, the more for Russia there is, the public opinion. The alternative for Germany is a bigger party in most lands of Federal Republic of Germany in the east. And in the next elections, it seems to be it's going to be more and more powerful. And that means that Merz is like an extreme right in the German politics. And therefore, it could change. The leadership of the countries that are staunchly anti-Russian in France, in Germany, also in Britain, may change. Even Poland doesn't want Ukraine to be admitted here and there because they feel there's competition. Countries of Southern Europe are either neutral or actually are eager to stop the war and restore normal relations with Russia, such as Italy, Greece, Cyprus, Spain, Portugal, and so on. So I don't think Europe is it's not Europe. It's the leaders of certain countries today that are staunchly anti-Russian. But this is going to change when there is peace signed and when they're involved in the negotiations on the architecture of security in Europe, because they will be asked clearly, then things may change. In a year or two after the war ends, I don't think this bellicose atmosphere could be sustained because the people in these countries have absolutely no interest. And the second point is they have no money. I mean, really, the United States has a lot of debt, but France is worse, and Italy is worse, and Britain is worse. Germany is okay for now, but its economy is shrinking, and they really were benefiting a lot from Russian cheap gas, and now they're not. So in other words, the economic trends in Europe make it highly unlikely that they would continue or could afford to be bellicose and seek confrontation with Russia. It just doesn't make any sense. It should turn around once appropriate treaties or agreements are in force, and then I think we'll go back to normal.
You mentioned, and I already knew that you were in France. What's been the media portrayal of the situation in general in France? Is it about what we would expect?
You know what? I watch French news every day, and seems to be not the most important issue. It's not like in America, Fox News, and everybody talks about all of this and that because it's so much connected with Trump. It is one of the issues, and Macron says this, and then they will report it, and then there'll be a million other things that they will talk about. I think there's much more discussion of Gaza than of Russian-Ukraine war, much more. Because that sort of involves the French population much more, because there are 5 million Arabs and close to 800,000 Jews, and they are French. They all consider themselves French, and this is much closer to heart than the relationship with Ukraine and Russia. They do help Ukraine. Macron occasionally promises to send a couple of tanks, but it doesn't make any difference because France doesn't have any money, it doesn't have any weapons. And that could be say about the same thing about Germany, about Britain. They have no power anymore, no military, no economic clout. And so their feisty mood is actually laughable because there's nothing they can do.
Well, with that, I guess, do I want to recommend that people follow you on YouTube? What's the best way people can follow you?
Yeah, well, it's very easy. They just put Vladimir Brovkin in the YouTube search bar, and my latest video would come up.
All right, so I'll link to that at tomwoods.com/2680, because you can imagine Professor Brovkin has a great many videos you would enjoy on both history and current events. I did enjoy that clip you sent me, or that portion of that interview you did that had to do with your own background, your own educational background, how you wound up at Harvard.
Yes.
That's all very interesting material that maybe we might revisit at some point ourselves sometime down the line. But in the meantime, I appreciate this analysis, and we'll watch what happens this week. But thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Thank you.